Let's talk about how to get rich as a business owner. No, you have not tuned in to some Ponzi scheme episode. I'm not about to sell you some MLM or a credit card. This is genuine, actionable advice that I have implemented in my own business over the last year in order to increase the amount of money that you have left over as profit that you as the business owner can then spend, extract, or just save and have at your disposal. This is episode number 312 of Starting the Conversation. I'm your host, Alice Benham, and I am talking a lot about money at the moment. Not just because I think it's important that we have more conversations about business finances, and I for sure know that my past self could have done with hearing content like this, but also because it's April, we're in a new tax year, and whilst I believe that you should and can take control of your business finances any day of the week, any time of the year, it's never too late, you've never missed your chance. It is quite nice, isn't it, to have that feeling of like spring's around the corner, new tax year, great opportunity to address your business finances and think about how you can take more control. Whether you're tuning into this as someone who feels completely lost when it comes to your money, or whether you feel quite on top of it and you're just on that ongoing journey now of always looking for ways to improve, I believe that in this episode you're going to pick up on some actionable insights that I don't just believe will help your business finances improve, but have genuinely helped my own business finances over the last year. The topic that we're talking about today is this idea of getting more money out of your business. And this is something that I think we can sometimes be hesitant to talk about as business owners. Maybe it feels a bit taboo, maybe it feels a bit icky, maybe we just feel a bit kind of money grabbing, talking about like, I want more money, I want more profit. But let's be honest, we might love running our businesses for the fulfillment, for the time freedom, for the flexibility, for the challenge, for all of these different reasons. But one of those reasons is probably also going to be to do with finances. Money is a very key part of living in this world that we are in. And it's also something that can buy you a huge amount of things. You know, not just material things and objects. If that's your thing, then great. But ultimately, money buys you freedom. It buys you control. It buys you stability and comfort. It buys you options. So I believe as business owners, this is a really important conversation for us to have around how do we get more money out of our businesses. Doesn't matter whether you're getting that money out of your business to just keep it in a savings account and feel more secure, or whether you're getting that money out of your business because you want to buy something shiny and cool that excites you. It does not matter your reasons, and you don't even have to have a reason, because ultimately having more profit in our businesses, extracting more money out of our businesses is really great. One of those things that's kind of like win-win. Even if we don't have a reason to do it, it's a really great thing to do. I remember actually a few years ago, I had a real light bulb moment around this idea of getting money out of my business as a business owner. It was when someone said to me, you are gonna get rich, or I mean, I'm using that word rich because it's like a, shiny word, isn't it? But you are gonna build your wealth as a business owner one of two ways. Either you build a business that is sellable and one day you sell that business to another person or another company and you then get this, probably quite big payout. Or number two, you extract money from your business and invest it in other areas that are gonna then help you grow money and have money in the long term. Now, I heard that advice, and maybe you've heard that advice already and you're like, yeah, obvious, Alice, duh. But when I heard that advice, it was a genuine light bulb moment for me, because at the time I was thinking about, I'm running this business and I'm working super hard and I'm not taking loads of money out of it because like one day it's all going to be worth it financially. And then I realized, well, my business really isn't that sellable. Maybe one day I might sell off a part of my business. I don't know, maybe my stationery shop on paper or one of my events brands might be interesting to someone else, but I'm not really running a business that one day I'm going to have this big, multi-million pound exit from. So there probably isn't going to be this day where financially I get this big, influx of cash and it all feels worth it. So if that's not going to be the case for me, I've got to think about on an ongoing basis how I make it worth it for me financially. Now, you might have a really sellable business, so this might not be relevant advice for you, but so many people that I see, particularly people that are building businesses that are service-based around their personal brand, there might not be a really easily sellable part to it, but they are still in that mindset of like, okay, I'm going to sacrifice my personal finances so that one day it's all worth it. And obviously in the early stages of growing a business, and there's many times throughout running a business where you do have to sacrifice your personal finances, but we don't want to do that forever, because what you don't want is that one day you stop running your business and you go, oh, that didn't really give me much back. Like ultimately financially, I don't feel like I got back from that what I wanted. So that is why I think it's so important we talk about this topic, because if you are working so incredibly hard to run your own business and sacrificing on so many of the things that you do in order to run your business and to grow it, I want to make sure that there is conversation around how that ultimately comes back to you. Maybe it's not so that you're getting a load of money from your business right now, but perhaps just thinking about what you might need to be doing in order to be able to take that money out in the future, to set your business up, to give that money back. As I've mentioned already in this episode, what I'm sharing today is definitely coming from a place of lived experience, because I was about to call it another light bulb moment, but let's just call it maybe more of a tough love moment with myself and my accountant a year ago, actually, almost exactly a year ago today. We were sat down, myself and my accountant, who is brilliant, by the way. If anyone ever needs an accountant recommendation, you just let me know, because she is fantastic. We were sat down looking at my tax return for the year 2023 to 2024. So I follow the typical April to April tax year. So we were looking at that 12-month period. And what we were doing is comparing that 12-month period to the previous one. To give you just complete transparent numbers, because I believe the more we talk about the actual numbers, the less, overwhelming and uncertain finances become in business. The previous tax year in my business, I had made a revenue of just over £80,000. It was when I was really close to going VAT registered, but trying to delay and avoid it for many reasons that I've talked about in previous episodes about VAT. So I made revenue of just over £80,000. So that is the total amount of money that came into my business bank account in that 12-month period, 2022 to 2023. The profit from that £80,000 was just under £30,000. So £80,000 revenue, what that then tells you is that I spent about £50,000 expenses, and my profit at the end of it was £30,000. So that is a pretty good kind of profit margin to have. It's almost a 50% profit at the end of the day. And that profit's obviously then there for me to maybe keep in the business, to pay myself through dividends, or to reinvest. It's basically just money that is left over at the end. When I then looked at my tax year for the next year, so 2023 to 2024, what I saw was a huge increase in my revenue. So from £80,000 in the previous year, when I looked at my revenue from this next year, it was £120,000. So that is a 50% increase. In just a year, I had generated £40,000 more revenue in my business. That's great. That's impressive. That's cool for many reasons. We can, talk about how you increase revenue another day. But here's the kicker. When I then looked at my profit for that tax year, just over a year ago, I was looking at these numbers with my accountant. What did I see? The profit was still just under £30,000. So I had increased my revenue by 50%, but I had no visible increase on my profit. And what you can see from that is that therefore my profit margin was so much lower. In fact, what's that now? Like almost a 25% profit margin is 30,000 of 120. So between those two periods, I had increased my revenue, the big number, a huge amount, but the little number, my profit, which is what ultimately matters quite a lot to me in my business, hadn't increased at all. Now, I'm going to be really honest with you. When I was looking at that with my accountant, I felt really disheartened. I felt really frustrated. I was looking at all of this hard work that I'd put into increased revenue, £40,000 more of selling and launching and delivering and creating things, but ultimately at the end of the day, no clear reward for that. There's a phrase that goes around when we talk about finances, which is that revenue is vanity and profit is sanity. Say that again. Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. Now, in some businesses, profit isn't the most important thing. Maybe you're in a phase of extreme growth and you're just aiming to reinvest and reinvest and reinvest. But for many of us, especially when you're building a business that you want to just kind of sustainably grow and pay you, a good return on the work that you're putting in, profit is incredibly important. It's one of the reasons that I get so frustrated. In fact, I don't even get frustrated anymore because I'm just so used to it, but it really grinds my gears when you see people talking about these big revenue numbers. I made 10K months, I had a 6-figure launch, I made yada, 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 because I could have easily talked about online how I increased my revenue by 50% year on year, but you'll notice I didn't. And that's because ultimately what really mattered to me, which was the profit, had, if anything, got worse. I'd made no more money despite making a huge amount more revenue. So when I had this realization a year ago, I knew one thing, which was I need to increase the profitability of my business and I need to be taking more money out of my business as a business owner. I kind of set out on this mission, and what I'm going to be sharing today is some of the things that I really did that helped me to make improvements. And I'm not just sharing these from a place of like, here's what I'm doing, let's hope they work out. I can confidently tell you that these things have worked. Just the other day, I sat down with my accountant to look at my next year return. So we were then looking at 2024 up to 2025. So my most recent financial year in the business. And what we saw was not just another increase in terms of revenue, which is great, love that, but ultimately an increase in the bottom line, which is my profit. The numbers are still kind of settling because we actually still have a couple of weeks left of the tax year as I'm recording this. But what it's looking like is going to be true is that for this next tax year, my revenue was around £170,000. So again, another increase of about £50,000, which is great and something I'm very proud of. But ultimately, what I was most curious about when she was showing me these numbers is like, but what happened with the profit? Because as I've shared already, that for me was my mission over the last year, was like, I don't want to just make more revenue. If I'm going to make more revenue, there has to be an increase in profit as a result. And I believe at the moment, and I'm going to do a social post sharing the exact numbers once the tax year is definitely finished, but it's not going to change a huge amount in the next couple of weeks. The profit of that £170,000 is looking like it's around about the £60,000 mark. So we're back to that profit margin being a lot higher. And in proportion to the previous tax year, that is a doubling of my profit. Between two tax years, my revenue increased by maybe, well, what is that increase? 120 to 170 is like 50% increase. Okay, so it's roughly had like a 50% increase in revenue, so like half again, yet my profit doubled. So it was an 100% increase. And that is the kind of growth I'm interested in. The previous comparison where it was like revenue's up, profit's the same, not good. This next year though, where I was like, oh great, revenue's still up, but the profit is actually up way more. That is the kind of growth that I think really matters, at least for me in my business and my priorities. So because I know these things work, let me share them with you. If you are in a similar position, and I mean, who's not in the position of thinking about how do we make more money at the end of the day in our businesses? That is something that I think no matter what your goals are is going to be important to you. So going to actually share 4 things with you that I feel over the last year I've done, not perfectly, not consistently, not even sometimes intentionally, but looking back I can see were kind of the key pieces that really led to that profitability improving. The first one, which I think is one of the biggest things, at least for me, is understanding the profit of the individual parts of your business model. Touched on this briefly in last week's episode, but really this I think is fundamental to building a business that overall is more profitable. When I looked at that return where I'd made a whole lot more revenue, but the profit had not increased, immediately what I started to work out was where in my business model has that come from? What have I done in the last year that has not had the right level of profit in it, or has maybe even lost money that has contributed to that? Now, there wasn't one clear, like all of the problem is this kind of solution that I realized when I did this investigation. But when I sat down and looked at, right, my online products, what's that looking like in terms of profit? My stationery shop, my Christmas events, my podcast, my one-to-one services, my group programs and courses, my event speaking. When I really broke down each part of the business model and instead of just looking at profit as a whole, looked at the profit of each of those individual pieces, I could see things so much more clearly. What I realized in doing that was, first of all, that one part of my business model specifically was losing me money. I had a gut sense that it wasn't going very well in terms of profit, but I'd never really fully forced myself to face the numbers. And that was incredibly hard to realize, but a really valuable thing to realize, because then I could think, right, well, do I want to keep doing this? Like, if this is going to lose money, that's taking up profit from other parts of the business. Like, do I want that? Is it worth it? And I could also understand, obviously, the other end of the spectrum of like, right, what parts of my business have the best profit in them? So if I want to scale, what do I need to be doing more of? Scaling a business is so difficult because there's so many different ways that you can do it. You know, every part of your business model is a different lever that you can pull to increase growth. But we don't just want to be pulling levers that increase the revenue. We want to be pulling the levers that ultimately have profit within them. So that was such a helpful thing for me to do. And that is something that I didn't just do once for that tax year, but I now do it on a monthly basis. Every month I look at not just the big numbers, like how much revenue did I make last month? How much did I spend? What's my profit last month? I'll also understand the breakdown of that. So when I finish a launch or I finish doing something in my business, or I'm just looking at the day-to-day finances, I'm understanding the the breakdown. I no longer just look at the overall profit. I really get to know and try to stay very aware of the individual profit of each part of my business model. Profit is important to you. You don't just want to be looking at it on that kind of overall basis. You want to be understanding how each part of your business is contributing, or in my case, not contributing towards that overall profitability. And then you know what to do more of, what to do less of in order to increase your profit overall. So that's the first thing I'd say. And I think that is something that no matter where you're at in business is important to do, is to not just be looking at the top level numbers, but always be breaking it down. In my track spreadsheets that I use in my business, but also sell within the strategy shop, and they're in the sale this month, it doesn't just have you look at the total figures every month. I really think it's helpful for us to break it down and also understand, right, not just how much did I make, but where from. I don't really just care about making, £10,000. I care about where that £10,000 came from, because that means something for the health of my business, for the work that I had to put in. So that's the first thing I want to share with you, is understanding that individual profitability of each part of your business. The next thing that I'll share, which I think kind of leads on from that quite nicely, is having regular oversight on your spending. Profit is your revenue minus your expenses. So if you want more profit, there's one or two things that you can do. You can either increase your revenue or you can decrease your expenditure. Now, from my comparison years that I've unpacked for you, you can see that I had a big amount of growth year on year in terms of my revenue, but ultimately I didn't actually see that impact the profit. Now, that's not always going to be the case. If you've got kind of a really tight lock on the spending in your business, then you likely can increase profit by just increasing your revenue. That can be done. I mean, that's how I've done it partly in the last year. However, I think we often forget there's another factor at play here, which is how much you're spending. Even if you increase your revenue, as I did, if you are then spending more in line with that, you're not ultimately going to then see as much profit relative to the revenue that you've grown. I made £40,000 more, but I clearly spent also £40,000 more. And whilst some of that expenditure I think was necessary in order to scale the business, I don't believe we can ever just scale revenue and, if you make £10,000 more revenue, that's £10,000 more profit. Very rarely that's doable. You often do need to spend money to make it. However, if you are spending at the same rate that you're making, then of course that profit growth isn't going to be there. And so I look back and realize that some of that expenditure was needed, but I probably could have been more aware of where my money was going and more intentional about that. Tracking your spending is so important. And I don't just mean for the tax man and for your accountant and for your, VAT returns or whatever, but for you to really understand, how much does your business need to spend each month just to keep running? How much do you need to pay for all of your software? How much do your team and freelancers cost you every month? How much are you spending each month on travel and variable expenses? Those numbers will likely fluctuate, but if you don't know rough figures off the top of your head, and I say this with compassion, it's okay if you don't right now, but let me just invite you to get to know those numbers. Because if you're anything like me, I spend the money that's there. My business finances, I feel quite comfortable spending. I definitely don't have a problem with spending money. If someone says this thing might help you, I'm like, cool, let me give it a go. Or if I want to think about hiring team, I'll go, great, let's try it. I'm quite open to invest. So I've got to be careful about that, because if I think that all of the money in my business bank account is there to spend, I might spend it and then actually end up thinking that that wasn't ultimately going to help with profit. So the key lesson here is to track your spending on a monthly basis, not just in your tax return when the data is somewhat irrelevant. As the numbers are happening, get to know what's going out. Again, when I do my monthly tracking of my finances, I'm not just looking at, I spent £8,000. I'm looking at, I spent this much on my software, this much on my team, this much on travel, this much on investing. And that then just helps me to think about, okay, how is that number? Is that the kind of number that feels good to me in terms of expenditure, or do I want to look to decrease that? And if so, what areas might I need to be more mindful about my spending in? Side note, this is also why I love the profit first method, because you can actively save for the expenses that are important to you. So I have a savings pot in my bank account for equipment that I might want to buy. I have a savings pot for investments in other people helping me in my business. That then helps me to know almost what my budget is for those things, and I don't just spend money because it's there, but I kind of wait for that budget to exist first. So that's my second thing for you, is to really understand what is happening with your spending. And on the other end of that spectrum, the third thing I want to share with you is to also really understand your progress towards your financial goals. As I mentioned, the two ways that you can increase your profit is to increase your revenue or decrease your expenditure. Now, my personal lived experience is that I find it easier to increase revenue than I do to decrease expenses. And, the year where I increased my revenue massively didn't actually end up reflecting in my profit. However, those two things are both important. And I would say in this last year, as I've mentioned already with my numbers, I didn't stay at 120,000. My business revenue still grew. And I do believe that contributed to an increase in the profit as well. It was almost both of those things happening simultaneously. More revenue and less expenditure worked together to increase that profit. So this is kind of on that point of increasing revenue. And what I want to talk about here is us, instead of just letting the revenue happen to us, being proactive about planning for and aiming for the revenue we want to generate. It's very easy, I think, as business owners to kind of look at all of our numbers retrospectively and to almost see it as like, oh, okay, yep, that's what my revenue ended up being, because maybe we don't feel very in control of it, or we just think that we can't control it. Of course, we can't fully control what our revenue figure ends up being each month and each year, but we can influence it. And when we have a clear idea of what revenue we want to make, and we make a plan of how we're going to get there, we can then track our progress towards that. So many of us stop at just setting a revenue goal. We'll go, oh, I want to make this much money in my business. Okay, off I go. A revenue goal without a sales plan to work out how you're going to get there is likely just going to cause you frustration and disappointment. So after you set a revenue goal, after you work out, right, I want to increase my revenue by this much, so I want to make this much, what I want you to do next is then reverse engineer it. What do you need to sell? And how many of each things that your business offers do you need to sell? And when, in order to reach that target? When you reverse engineer your revenue goal, you then create a plan for yourself, because you help yourself to see, right, I need to launch this, I need to sell that, I need to promote that, because you know what you might need to do in order for that revenue to increase. I'm definitely speaking from personal experience here, where some tax years I would look at my return and be like, oh, interesting, cool, that just happened. I didn't really know that we made that much revenue, or I didn't really make that happen. And there's something in that kind of mindset and behavior that's actually becoming quite detached. And I believe that we are in control. We can influence our revenue. And the more closely we understand what our revenue goal is, what we need to do to get there, and then track our progress towards that, the better it's going to be. Promise I'm not trying to make this episode just one big ad for my finance files, but in the track spreadsheets, which is the first product, you'll see in there's a way of not just calculating your revenue goal, but also then a sales calculator that helps you to reverse engineer that and understand how to get there. What I then do in my business is every month, as I'm tracking my revenue, I'm measuring it against those sales goals. Some months I don't hit my sales goals. Sometimes I make the money in a different way, or I don't hit the revenue goal at all. So I'm not looking at it from a place of like, have I succeeded or have I failed? I'm just helping myself to understand the data in real time. It's so interesting to me that when my clients are launching something and they then give themselves launch targets and they track their progress towards those targets, they so often make a lot more money because they've got that intention, because they're tracking. So that is my third kind of tip for you here. The third thing that I really did over the last year is have that revenue goal. Track your progress towards your sales plan though. Don't just think of a big revenue goal, work out what you need to do to get there and look at your progress towards that regularly. That then leads me on to my final point that I want to share with you, which I think is one of the most important points that I've shared in this episode, which is that in order to get more money out of your business, what you've also got to be looking at is what you pay yourself and how. How you pay yourself as a business owner is going to look different for each of us. So any examples I give here are just specific to my business and, the setup that I also have and how my businesses are kind of registered. If you are paying yourself sporadically, if you are just transferring yourself £1,000 here, £200 there, paying for that thing there at the business account, you are not setting yourself up to extract money out of your business in a controllable way. I really recommend that all of us as business owners think about paying ourselves as if we were employed. Even if you're not paying yourself through, PAYE, you might not be on a salary through your company. That regularity, I think, is a really helpful structure. Because when you pay yourself regularly, and that, by the way, doesn't have to be monthly. I know business owners that pay themselves weekly. I know people that pay themselves bi-weekly. I know people that pay themselves quarterly. Like whatever regularity feels good to you, whatever kind of cadence suits your financial needs and what you enjoy, make it regular, make it set. Because when it's regular, you can then actually start to plan with that in mind. If you're paying yourself in drips and drabs and it looks different all the time and there's no kind of rhyme or reason to that, you're going to find it really hard to work out how you might pay yourself more. So if that resonates, this is firstly your reminder to pay yourself in a more consistent way, even if that looks like maybe starting by paying yourself a small amount, but on the first of every month. And then maybe you do pay yourself smaller amounts throughout the month based on what comes into the business bank account, but there's still that one set moment of regularity. Or if you do want to pay yourself a fluctuating amount, make it structured. Don't just pay yourself, oh, the business has done quite well, I'll give myself another 1,000. Do it on a percentage basis. Pay yourself a percentage of that month's revenue or that month's profit. So even if it is fluctuating, there's reason to that. There's a strategy there. You're not just kind of making it up, but there's a plan. One of the other things I'd share as well is to just think about what you pay yourself and if you might be due a pay rise. I know that might sound really silly, but I actually realized this when I looked at those returns with my accountant. I realized that I hadn't given myself a pay rise in a really long time. In fact, it was back in, I think, 2020, at the end of that year, I started paying myself a certain amount per month, and that actually hadn't increased until just over a year ago. So I'd been paying myself the same kind of salary, if you want to call it that, although it was made up from salary and dividends because I'm a limited company, for almost 4 years, or in fact, pretty much 4 years. And imagine if you were in a corporate company and they paid you the same amount for 4 years, like you'd probably leave that company, or you'd definitely have some complaints. And I realized that I had grown my business and grown my revenue, but I hadn't actually grown what I was paying myself as a result of that. So when I realized that this was a bit of a problem for me, and I realized that although my business has made a lot more money, I didn't make any more, what I then did was started increasing my salary. So I put my salary up by a few hundred a month, and I've actually more recently put it up fairly significantly. In fact, I'm now paying myself £1,000 a month more than I was a year ago. And that feels significant, but that's because I let it go on for so long without any kind of increase. And I have to say from personal experience, when I'm getting paid that £1,000 extra every month, I'm feeling better as a business owner. I'm feeling like, oh yeah, this is worth it. Oh, I feel like I'm getting more back from this because I quite literally am financially. So this final point is really just around being intentional about what you pay yourself and also how. Think about maybe how you increase your pay. Maybe you have it on almost bands where it's like, right, if the business makes this much, then your salary increases to X amount. Or maybe you pay yourself a percentage bonus each month or quarter or year based on the business's performance. How you do this looks different for everyone, and there's no one right way to pay yourself as a business owner. But my general recommendations here are just to think about it, to ask yourself these questions, and just to check in with how you're paying yourself. Is it working for you? Is the amount that you're getting each month feeling good? I mean, don't get me wrong. It's easy to answer that question with yeah, but obviously I'd like more. Even I'm sat here yeah, happily pay myself more. But be honest with yourself, be realistic. What number would feel like it gives you back what you feel you're putting in to your business? And is there a plan for how you could get to a point of paying yourself that? Because I have to say, I've felt much more of a positive impact from increasing my pay as a business owner than I did from increasing my revenue by 50%. It's had a far more tangible impact on me. I feel far happier about it because ultimately it's a number that actually makes a difference for me. I think that's the point here, isn't it? Is revenue ultimately doesn't make a difference. What makes a difference is what you do with that revenue, the ways that you can invest it, or the profit that you have at the end of the day. So, in summary, 4 things that you can do in order to get more money out of your business and increase your profit is, first of all, understand and track the profitability of individual parts of your business model. Secondly, track your spending and be conscious of where your expenditure needs to be to hit your goals. Thirdly, don't just set a revenue target, but make a sales plan of how you're going to get there and track your progress. And then fourthly, review what you pay yourself and how you pay yourself, making sure that that feels good to you. And if it doesn't feel good, there's a plan of how to change that. I would love for you to reflect now on if there's an action step from this episode that feels most relevant for you. I know when it comes to business finances, it's so tempting to think in that all or nothing mindset where it's everything's awful, I'm doing awfully, there's no point even trying, this episode's just called me out, I'm doing so terribly. But that's not it, okay? I'm even recording this episode thinking oh, I could probably do that a bit more. Oh, I haven't done that little thing in a while. So I'm with you. No one is perfect at this stuff. There's no destination of being good at your business finances. It's a forever journey. So be compassionate with yourself and just think about, where can you start? Being overwhelmed and pressuring yourself to change everything at once is likely going to lead to a lack of progress. So instead, just think, right, where do I want to begin? What one thing could you take from this episode and maybe spend 20 minutes on today that might help move your finances forwards. I can tell you from such personal experience over the years, there's been many moments where I've thought, what is the point? This feels so overwhelming. I don't know where to go. But when you take the small steps, they start to add up. And when you feel the impact of that, I mean, there's just no better feeling, is there, than just feeling really in control of your business finances. Speaking of being in control, as I've mentioned a few times in this episode, if you feel like you are lacking the tools and the structure to help you to really have this awareness, to set your revenue goals, set your sales plan, track your money each month, look at your expenditure and profit, manage your money with the Profit First method, that is what my finance files exist to do. They are on sale for the biggest discount you're ever going to find them at for at least the next 12 months in the strategy shop. So make sure to head to the link in the show notes or just to head to my website, alicebenham.co.uk. Get your hands on them if they're going to be valuable for your business. They are tried, tested, loved by many, many people. So that is it for another episode. Thank you for tuning in. I will be back in your ears next Tuesday, not talking about money. I don't know if that makes you go, yes, phew, the money chat's over, or makes you go, oh no, I love money chat. However that may make you feel. Make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're tuning into this episode so you don't miss out on that. And remember, if you take action to improve your finances today, your future self is going to be incredibly grateful.